during Advent, we're telling the bigger story of the bigger Christmas. But it's not just the bigger Christmas, it's the longer Christmas too.
Longer? Do we want it any longer? It already goes from October until New Year.
That's not what I meant.
Oh, okay. Carry on then.
We seem to have contracted the birth of Jesus to a story that we can tell in less than 2 minutes and then usually just once a year. But that's a bit like writing your biography and only including what happened on your birthdays. It would be a short, disconnected tale, and it wouldn't by any means be the whole story. So for us, Christmas gets confined to December to cheer up our Northern Hemisphere darkness. And we can end up thinking, well, really, that's all it is. A little cosy tale to cheer up a bleak midwinter. But the bigger Christmas is the longer Christmas. There was a lot more story that came afterwards, but also there was a very big story that came before. And if you ever ask the question,
there have been countless babies born in poverty. Why do we put up lights for this one?
Well, this longer story is part of the answer. Our nativity play Christmases are just excerpts from a bigger plotline. Let me show you. What we know about Jesus comes from the Bible, and in particular, the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And what we know about what we call Christmas especially comes from Matthew and Luke's Gospel. Mark's Gospel starts when Jesus is already grown up, and John's Gospel does start with Christmas, but as more of a transcendent poetical theological reflection. What we think of as the Christmas story is lifted from the beginning of Matthew and Luke. Now, in the Bible, Matthew's Gospel is the first book in what we call the New Testament, the second half of the Bible. What we call the Old Testament was finished around 400 years previously, and there were no new pages for 4 centuries. And then the story restarts, and after such a long wait, so much anticipation to find out what happens in the most famous story in history, what are the first words? It's a long list of names. It's a family tree. Now, any decent editor today would probably say, well, that's not going to work. And perhaps for 21st century people in Western cultures, that's true. But most people who ever lived are not and have never been in that demographic. Our way of thinking is just one way of doing things. For many cultures, knowing your ancestry is super important. It's how you know who you are, and it shows that you're part of a much bigger story. Matthew's first paragraphs tell us this isn't a cosy tale for midwinter. This event, this birth, is part of something much, much bigger. This family tree covers the whole Old Testament period, or most of it. Jesus' story is that story. And at Christmas, we reach the turning point. We're not going to look at all the names on this list. You'll probably be relieved. But in fact, Matthew writes so as to make us notice 2 names especially, Abraham and David. Why? Well, that's part of an even longer story. When God created, he was, in a sense, beginning a story. His real, true story of his life with us. Our journey with him as king and author. Happy in a happy world. But humans weren't satisfied. They wanted to write all their own story, develop their own plot, choose a different path. Which sounds fine. And it sounds fine because we live in an era when doing what I want and not letting anything get in my way is the most popular storyline of all. In truth, our stories often don't go as well as we hoped. Most of us reach a point when we'd like to go back. We'd like to tear out some of the pages, retrace our steps, do some rewrites, take a different path altogether. And as for the whole of humanity, well, there's a reason people with difficult anxiety problems are advised not to watch the news. And then the end result. Every story ends abruptly. But here's the thing, God didn't give up on his bigger story. He told Abraham that through his family the whole world would be blessed. A descendant would move the storyline back to the happy ending that never stops. And he told King David that a descendant would be the ultimate king who would lead all who trust him to the world that we all dream of. So Matthew's family tree is saying, do you see this big, epic, global plot line expecting this great and amazing person? And then Matthew says, now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. The baby in the manger is the descendant of those people who will bless the world, and the king who writes a better story. The real magic of Christmas is that the bigger, better story is alive and well. We're not stuck with the one we've got, and it doesn't need to end the way we fear. And that invitation to be in a different story includes people like you and me. That family tree, they're not all holy and kings and heroes. Many were very ordinary people. Some were rejected by the rest of society. Some were dodgy characters who did quite bad things. But when each of those people found the bigger story, they gave up their story for the better story of the coming king. And right now, you're faced with the same choice that they had.
Which story do you want to be in?
This is the bigger story of the bigger Christmas. But there's also a crucial question at the heart of Christmas that defines the whole thing. What happens if the author writes himself into the story? See you next time.